Hey everybody, how you doing? Good morning to you from the Sunnyvale Reject and sunny South Florida. I hope everybody's doing okay. Today I have an interesting video for you, at least. I hope it's fun. And if you haven't thought about it before, maybe you should, especially if you're a teacher or if you have kids. Because today we're going to talk about books that the Sunnyvale Reject, aka Jason Stocks, these are the books that I think should be taught junior, senior year. And if I had my ruthers, I'd much rather teach these than the ones that are on the canon that I simply must teach. Look, a lot of great books by a lot of wonderful writers, different sexes, gay, straight, male, female, north and south, all across the world. Lots of different cultures, lots of different voices have written a multitude of amazing books. I get it. But here in the United States, where we're trying to convince people, like for example, I teach 98% Hispanics, where we're trying to teach people to enjoy and understand American culture, literature, history, whatever, you got to do it in a way that's fun, in a way that resonates with them and that will stick with them, or otherwise it's just like me learning Greek in high school. Do you think I ever got a chance to use it? No. Did I study ancient Greek epics in the original language? No, I did not. I studied it and I forgot it. These are books that I think will stick with you, well, with the reader for lots of different reasons. So even though it might seem crazy at first, please come with me on this journey, won't you? Okay, so as I always say, we have to start somewhere, right? So let's start with R.L. Stein. R.L. Stein. Before I get started on this, let me get a little sippy poo of my coffee. Why should R.L. Stein be taught? Well, like I said, for one, you got to start somewhere. This is easy to understand. Not a lot of effort has to, go into it to understand it. There's no profound message being proffered or anything like that. So you're reading it just to have fun. You're resonating with the high school experience a little bit. The era clothing, era music, era snacks and fast food and things like that. A little taste of Americana. But nobody delves too deeply. R.L. Stein didn't. None of the characters do. There's not any kind of crazy dynamic between the characters. There's a couple of twists and turns, but if you're paying attention, you can see them coming from a mile away. But even though these might not, this kind of book might not contain the literary devices we look for in masterpieces, you can still say they don't exist. So when you're looking for switches, for example, if it doesn't have it, you can say, I looked forever. It doesn't have it, but you still look for it. When you're analyzing character, if these characters are one-dimensional, two-dimensional, flat, or whatever, then you say that. The book would have been better if. But I want to read something to you, and then I'm going to read something to you, soon in another book, and you tell me that if you didn't know, you'd be able to tell the difference. So I think this starts out okay. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Very simplistic. He's a minimalist. We all know that. And not just because that's his style, but because the people that read these books don't have much of an attention span, I'm guessing. Present company excluded, because we read other stuff, but folks who solely read this, they're not in it for a profound read. The fall. The day of the terrible accident was bright and clear. Erica McLean stared out the back window of the car as houses and yards, word by word by. A few leaves had started to turn. The passing maples revealed patches of yellow and scarlet among the dusty green leaves. These splashes of color were the only clue that summer was fading. Poignant, simple, fairly crisp, not a word wasted. So not bad. Roses are red, corpses are blue. On Valentine's Day, you'll die too. I've talked about this book a couple of times. It's one of my favorite Fear Street books. And I say give it a shot, and I say teach it. Let this be the first book you teach and get your students to talk about what is not there, what this book lacks, right? As opposed to some of what these other books have. Next on the list, I would start with that. Next on the list would be Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five, phenomenal, hilarious anti-war novel. Instead of teaching 1984, which is a great book, but it's so dry. It is so dry that when I think about it, I need a drink of water. all I can think about is being watched and the the taste and smell of cheap gin. If you're going to teach an anti-war book, I say teach this or Johnny Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo, another phenomenal, one of the best books ever written. But one of the things that makes Kurt Vonnegut universal and loved his books always be on the shelf is the fact that he never stopped asking what he considered those silly adolescent questions. And to me, they're profound. You know, what happens after we die? Why are we here? You know, why do we allow governments to do what they do to us when we outnumber them? You know, the proletariat, we always outnumber them, but a few always control the masses, among other things, right? But he was the first writer that I ever noticed that wrote, you know, a nice chunky font and very easily consumable paragraphs, very short chapters, very short paragraphs, which, if I never explained this properly in some other videos, what I mean by that is, you know, if you're reading a big fat ass book, your bookmark just hardly moves throughout it, you know, and you're like, damn man, I'm never going to finish this book. But because these books are written the way they are, you know, it looks like you're making some progress fairly quick because you see some movement in your damn bookmark. All right, so very tough and very funny, sad and delightful, very Vonnegut. The New York Times. Slaughterhouse-Five, an American classic, is one of the world's great anti-war books. Centering on the infamous firebombing of Dresden, Billy Pilgrim's Odyssey Through Time reflects the mythic journey of our fractured lives as we search for meaning in what we fear most. Yeah, that could have been done better. It doesn't do it justice. Kurt Vonnegut was when he died, he was an old man, but he was an old kid. Still had that fun-loving spirit, that amazement and awe, you know, at looking at the world and trying to figure things out. And I think that that's one of the things he does well, is ask a lot of questions. So Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five. If you were in my junior or senior literature or creative writing class, this would be book 2. Where do we go from here, you wonder? They push classics on us in the United States. Some of them I happen to love. You know, Dostoevsky, Charles Dickens, Dumas. Well, I still like some contemporary classics. I love Faulkner. I love Flannery O'Connor. But in the United States, I think we read the wrong classics and too early on. I've said this before, but you cannot really understand the French Revolution in middle school. Your mind is elsewhere. I mean, you will not be able to do the book justice because it's just beyond your experience. Although it is wonderfully written, and as far as mechanics go and tying a novel back together, A Tale of Two Cities does it the best in my opinion. But this is a book that I think is short and very, very sweet, and as an introduction to classics will just make you want to read as many as you can get your hands on. It's Silas Marner by George Eliot. George Eliot wrote Middlemarch. We know that George Eliot is a female. This is a pen name. I loved this book, and it is 199 pages long. This is a newer edition, you know, a newer copy. I like some of the older covers a lot better. But this story will teach you as a reader that good things come to those who wait, and that the things that we put our trust in, our pride in, and the things that helped us identify who we are as human beings don't matter. Like, money does not define you. The khakis you wear to work do not define you. How you treat people and your circle of friends, how good those folks are, you know, and what they're willing to do to help you out, that defines you. And he finds that out later in life, the protagonist does. So an innocent young man is falsely accused of stealing church money. With his life shattered, his trust in God lost, and his heart broken, Silas leaves Lantern Yard for a rural area. He throws himself into his craft and comes to adore the gold coins he earns and hoards from his weaving. Yeah, so he's like, screw the world, you know, I'll just make my money and disappear, and I'll save up for a rainy day. But turns out somebody steals those coins from him, and he feels like his life is ruined. He doesn't know how he's going to make it from day to day. He can never save up that kind of money again. His future secure financial security is in doubt. And then comes a beautiful little girl in his life and changes absolutely everything. And the ending of this book is one that I'll never forget. It's very similar to A Tale of Two Cities. I just cannot forget the end of that book. There's a lot of great books out there, but then the endings let us down. This is one that will not let you down. You don't have to do anything but just kick back and free your mind. Forget about everything that's on it. Read this book. You're going to love it. And this is a great introduction to classical literature, to classics, you know. Even though George Eliot was English, I think, right? George Eliot was English. I think we should read this in America. It'll get us into more classics, and you'll learn something about sustained tension as a writer. There you go. Anyway, okay, so next on the list, anybody who knows me knows I teach this man's poetry, and I make folks watch videos about him because he's an American staple, and his books will live on in infamy. It is Charles Bukowski's Ham on Rye. Ham on Rye, that's right. In my class, English class, my literature class, even in journalism class, we will read his short stories, we'll read his poetry, and I like his no-nonsense, no woe is me, just street grit, something that anybody who's been through some shit in their life can resonate with. And again, he didn't get really, let's just say famous, wealthy until very late in life. So he's a testament to never giving up and telling it like it is. In fact, there's some great videos, some great interviews about Bukowski. And he says that when you get the shit kicked out of you often enough, you tend to tell the truth. And I think that that's what this will benefit. This is how this book will benefit a new writer, a writer especially, is that you just tell the truth. If you don't know, you make it up, but those lies matter, especially in fiction, especially because it's fiction, those lies matter. But you tell the truth as often as you can, because then you are telling your story with a sense of authority, and the people reading it know, they just feel that you are the one to tell the story and that you can be trusted. Okay, take a deep breath, everybody. This was impromptu. I didn't even, have you ever had a bad hair day, ladies? Men definitely have bad beard days. But I just started thinking, I put some books together and I was like, maybe this, you know, as opposed to just getting views and being funny or whatnot, this might really help some parents out there or some teachers that are struggling to keep their kids' attention, you know, or you yourself, if you've hit a reading slump, maybe these will lift you back up and inspire you to not give up, you know. Okay, so I do recommend Post Office. I do recommend Women. I recommend reading Charles Bukowski's poetry. He does wonders with local, what's the word? Not jargon, but local slang, local layman's terms that are very historically accurate. If I've screwed that up. But when you listen to him, you know you're listening to the real deal. He's very raw, and he didn't put a lot of filler in his poems, short stories, novels. He doesn't get all metaphysical. He just tells things the way they are. He can set up a scene, and he can write dialogue too, like nobody's business, you know. But Ham on Rye is about his life, and I hear a lot of people talk about writing about their life and writing about what you know and all that. Well, sometimes you can't do that because you've got the imagination, you've got the drive, but you haven't experienced it yet. So read a book about somebody who has. Harry Crews has a phenomenal book on writing too. If I had to substitute, actually it's a biography, autobiography, you know. And if I had to teach one of those, it'd either be that one or this one, but this would be number one. In what is widely held as the best of his many novels, Charles Bukowski details the long, lonely years of his own hardscrabble youth in the raw voice of alter ego Henry Chinaski. From a harrowing, cheerless childhood in Germany, through acne-riddled high school years and his adolescent discoveries of alcohol and women, in the Los Angeles Public Library, where he discovered D.H. Lawrence and Infante. Ham on Rye offers a crude, brutal, and savagely funny portrait of an outcast's coming of age during the desperate days of the Great Depression. If you didn't know, I'll tell you a story. This is how bad he had it. When he was a young kid, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, his father would make him cut the grass every weekend, and his dad would get on his hands and knees and look for hairs, you know, blades of grass that were uneven, and he would beat his kid unmercifully. So that's what he's talking about when he says, when you have the shit kicked out of you often enough, you tend to tell the truth. And so Anne Rice and Stephen King are often asked, where does it come from? Where does it come from? And they don't always know. Well, read Bukowski. He knew, and then you'll know too. Next, we should definitely be reading mythology in the United States, world mythology, and then we should hyper-focus on the Sumerians in Mesopotamia, and then the subsequent cultures, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and on down. The Sumerians are the first culture to rise to prominence and to come to us in totality after the deluge. There was definitely, high civilization and even high technology, folks. It doesn't take much digging to find that out. And a plethora of languages before the deluge. After the deluge, many of those cultures were destroyed. There's about 200 myths in the Mediterranean alone of it happening. It made it into the Old Testament, and stuff. But then the Sumerians rose to prominence. They come to us in totality because they left most of their writings on stone. And we used to think it was poetry, but it's not. It's not. They wrote it on clay tablets for posterity, for us in the future, and we don't really pay attention to it. But Gilgamesh, we know that Gilgamesh existed. His name is listed in the Sumerian Kings list. I believe he's the 7th patriarch after the deluge. Oh man, I hope I'm right about that. I really, really loved Gilgamesh. And if you read the Sumerian mythology and then you read Gilgamesh, you will realize that this is not a hero's tale, because Enkidu and Gilgamesh did not like each other. In fact, here's the truth of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a part god, right? 3/4 god, in fact. And he was going to die the death of a mortal human being on earth, and he didn't think that he should do that. He wanted to live forever. And he knew the only way to live forever was to get to the home planet, Nibiru, which took 3,600 years to orbit the sun. So he's trying to find the place where these craft take off, and it turns out it's in the cedar forest in Lebanon at Baalbek. That's why Lebanon at Baalbek at first was just a massive platform with 2,000-ton stones, y'all, because something very heavy was landing on it. And supposedly this is where, early humans would dig for gold. This ship would come by, they'd fill the ship with gold, and that ship would go to Nibiru, and they would put it out in their atmosphere to reflect infrared light, because it was giving them skin cancer, I guess. And their planet took so long to orbit the sun, they couldn't really leave it because they would live forever. So Gilgamesh is trying to get to the cedar forest to Baalbek so that he can get on one of those spacecraft and go back to the home planet. That's crazy. That's crazy. There's also a revolving sword. This area is protected, just like in the Garden of Eden. Do the reading, put 2 and 2 together, and you'll have a new concept of God, who God is, where he or she is at. It'll bring you closer to God. But Gilgamesh is more than just a myth. It's one of the earliest writings that come through to us in antiquity. It's this version's probably from 2000 BC, something like that. So what's that make it, over 3,000 years old? Give Gilgamesh a try. You're going to really like it. And then if you read some Sumerian myth as just building up the foundation there, you're going to put 2 and 2 together. You're going to see antiquity and our ancient ancestors a lot differently, and it'll blow your mind. Okay. All right, hang on. This Herbert Mason's version is really good too. Herbert Mason's best-selling Gilgamesh is the most widely read and enduring interpretation of this ancient Babylonian epic, but it comes to us from Sumeria. One of the oldest and most universal stories known in literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh presents the grand, timeless themes of love and death, loss and reparations within the stirring tale of a hero king and his doomed friend. His friend is doomed because Gilgamesh presses him on to do crazy shit. Enkidu, his name, Enki, of Enki, the name, the truth, and where it all comes from is in his name. He is sent there to beat up Gilgamesh because he's a hominid, and Gilgamesh is a demigod. He's huge, so they send this hominid to fight Gilgamesh, and Enkidu is, of the animals. He hangs out with the animals, but he sleeps with a prostitute, and he gets that woman's scent on him so that he can be civilized enough to go into town to find Gilgamesh and fight him, but then the animals won't have anything to do with him. But because he knows the forest, Gilgamesh enlists him to help him find this place where these rocket ships take off. And he has a dream in the middle of the night, Gilgamesh does, where ash and fire is falling from the sky, and there's this rattling and stuff, because you know what? That craft, let's call it a shuttle or a rocket, has taken off. Okay, enough. You're not in my class, but I bet you wish you were now, huh? We have fun and interesting conversations like that. Okay, so there comes a point in the United States where, to be well read, you have to read two authors. You have to read Hemingway, and you have to read this next author and this book, and it's William Faulkner, The Sound and the Fury, and it absolutely should be taught in every high school classroom. And it also should be taught again in college, like as a junior or a senior, because anything worth reading once is worth reading two or three times, because we don't always get everything from a first reading. And it's like watching a show. We watch movies more than once. We should read books more than once too. This book, for psychological depth of the characters, it can't be beat. He's got 500 years of history created with these families in this town in Jefferson County. He created Yoknapatawpha. It's a reflection. It's supposed to be Oxford, Mississippi, where he lived the majority of his life. He left a couple of times, but Oxford, it was his home, and that's where he stayed. So a lot of Faulkner's work is pure imagination, like Emily Dickinson. But this is a book you must read at some point in your life. I'm going to tell you what this is about, but before you can read this, you have to read another writer. One of the greatest novels of the 20th century, The Sound and the Fury, is the tragedy of the Compson family, featuring some of the most memorable characters in American literature. Rebellious, beautiful Caddy, the man-child Benji, haunted, neurotic Quentin, Jason, the brutal cynic, and Dilsey, their black servant. I love Dilsey. The beginning of this book, it drove me crazy for years. I had no idea what they were talking about in the very beginning, but I won't read that again now because I've read it before. But when you read that first paragraph on page 3, you're going to say, I don't get it because of who's talking and what his handicap is. But it will make sense, maybe in the second read or maybe towards the end of the first time you read the book. But then when it does, it'll blow your mind, the way Faulkner describes scene. And very, very richly detailed too. If you want to write, you must read and study Faulkner. And I think this is good because there's so much to pick out, and you can up the rigor when you're teaching it in class as much as you want. So definitely read and teach Faulkner. Okay, so before you read Faulkner, though, you got to read Larry Brown. You have to read Dirty Work. You won't be ready to go straight into Faulkner. None of these books on this list can prepare you for Faulkner. Okay, so you've spent time in Mississippi. Oh boy, you've been to some blues concerts. You've eaten some crawfish and some ribs. No, you don't know Mississippi yet. Just because you've been to the military park? No, sir. No, sir. It's a dark, gothic place. Brooding. And 10,000 years of history and so many different cultures have called that place home. It's amazing and mythic, legendary. Dirty Work is about a black vet and a white vet in a hospital sitting across from each other talking for real. And that open dialogue happens a lot more than you might think in Mississippi. But this will get you accustomed to the regional dialect, the setting of Mississippi, some of its mythical components, because it does. And I definitely suggest reading mythology before you start to read any of the legendary Southern writers, Barry Hannah, Larry Brown, William Faulkner, Harry Crews. There's so many more. Donna Tartt is extremely modern to me compared to those folks. But Dirty Work is a great, great novel. You're going to love it. Really, you are. It's gonna pull at your heartstrings. You're going to fall in love with Larry Brown, and then you will ultimately be led to William Faulkner. Just like Goosebumps, Fear Street, Point Horror, Terror Academy. This is a beautiful first edition, first print from Algonquin. Dirty Work by Larry Brown. You must read it, and you must teach it before you teach Faulkner. And then we're going to go back to basics, y'all. This writer I've talked about, one of his books made my 10 greatest books of all time. And y'all know there's hundreds, there's thousands of wonderful books out there. And again, by so many different people, male and female, so many different cultures. But these are the ones that really stirred something in me and that I could really resonate with. Loved the voice, loved the style, loved the design of the interior of the book. These are the books that I love, and I think that once kids get their hands on them, or any kind of reluctant reader or somebody looking to just fall in love with reading again, these books are going to be right at home in your hands. And so will this one. This one's going in my kid's packet for books he must read. It's John Fonte's 1933 was a bad year, and I loved it. I loved this book. It is so short and so sweet and so sad, but also the similes are just outrageous and very fresh, kind of like Raymond Chandler was. He sets up these very poignant scenes that make you feel like you're there. Sometimes they're awkward, sometimes they're sweet, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're scary. But I just want to read you the first paragraph in this. And this book will teach people that you don't need to be so long-winded, that you don't need details to bog people down, not overly detailed anyway, and that you don't need a 1,000 characters, you know. You just need a few important characters that are in a tough situation. They've got to work their way out of it. That you fall in love with these characters. You can't help but care about them, and that makes everything they do vital and important. And also, you keep turning the pages. These great chapter cliffhangers in the vein of R.L. Stein, you know. So we have more on our minds than young readers. Young readers don't have as much on their mind as adults. So those cliffhangers that just keep the tension going, it works for adult literature and classics alike. 1933 was a bad year by John Fonte. This is the first paragraph. It was a bad one. The winter of 1933, waiting home that night through flames of snow, my toes burning, my ears on fire, the snow swirling around me like a flock of angry nuns. I stopped dead in my tracks. The time had come to take stock. Fair weather or foul, certain forces in the world were at work trying to destroy me. It sounds like some good old-fashioned Dostoevsky, like Notes from Underground or something. You got to find out now what's going on, and before long you're 35 pages in, and the book's only down 123 pages. So you're like, well, it won't take much more to finish this. Let me go ahead and finish it, and that's before you find out how good it is. But did I read you? I read you the first paragraph of that Fear Street book. I read you the first paragraph of 1933 was a bad year, and the detail was amazing. The flames of snow. Can you imagine that walking? Have you ever walked barefooted in the snow but felt the heat of the really, really cold weather? So I get that. It paints a nice picture. But when I was talking about Kurt Vonnegut, this could be Fear Street. This could really read like Fear Street. Look. The surgeon spoke English, and he said to Billy, "I take it you find war a very comical thing?" Billy looked at him vaguely. Billy had lost track momentarily of where he was or how he had gotten there. He had no idea that people thought he was clowning. It was fate, of course, which had costumed him. Fate and a feeble will to survive. "Did you expect us to laugh?" the surgeon asked him. Now, that's on page 193. It's just a snippet, just a little clip, but it reads like anything else. Anything else. You know how people say, even the Sumerian said this, there's nothing new under the sun. And people will say, it's not the story, it's how you tell it. And to a certain extent, that is very, very true, because there is nothing new under the sun. We are all going to lose people we love. We have to work, a lot of the time, jobs that we hate, around people we can't stand, to buy shit that we don't need, and I'm sure that that's happened all throughout our existence on this earth. It just is a matter of who's telling the story and how they tell it, of whether or not it breaks through and reaches somebody. Okay, that's it. I'm not going to take up any more of your time. You've got a lot of things to do this weekend, so get out there and do it. I'm going to shut up and leave you with this. I hope that this inspires you to pick up a book you've never heard of, to pass along a book that you think might get a kid inspired to read more, because reading is where it's at. Stay cool. Write your own book.